Welcome to the Complete Story Series, where I take trade paperbacks and single issues and I break them down into digestible bites to help you understand. Then I read them dramatically back to you. Today we're going to be continuing our coverage of Venom, and this storyline is going to be the conclusion to the Poison storyline that actually started up in Venomverse, and then they kind of went to normal Venom stuff. All of it is in our playlist down below, so don't worry, you'll be able to catch up very easily, but the Poison enemies are basically a symbiotic kind of multiversal enemy that lives off of Venom's symbiote hosts. It's really weird, really interesting, but it makes for a very good story. And don't forget, today's episode is brought to you by Squarespace. Just go check out squarespace.com/Comicstorian for a great deal. The link is right down below, and at the end of this episode, I'll tell you a little more about it. On the faraway planet of Clintar, the homeworld of the symbiotes, a family of symbiotes have an outing when suddenly they hear a voice calling out to them. They stop and they look back, and the man appears before them stating, "Oh, would you looky here, a sweet little Clintar family. Must be my lucky day." The symbiotes turn to run, and the man points his gun, telling them, "Don't make this too easy on me. Go ahead and run for your lives now." As the symbiotes try to get away, a few of them set traps for the man, and when one stops to help the other, they're shot. The man walks over stating, "You shouldn't have come back. But then again, I wouldn't have let that slide. My buyer wants 5 fresh symbiotes." Meanwhile, in Madripoor, the young Scott Summers steps outside so that he can speak to his father, Corsair, who is currently out in space with the Starjammers. Scott asks, "So, like a space pirate?" And Corsair tells him that he prefers the term space swashbuckler. He and the Jammers are doing well. But before long, Hepzibah and the others appear on the screen asking when is he coming back to space. Corsair tells everyone to give him a few minutes so that he can speak to his son. Also, how are things with Jean and maybe, what's her name, Bloodstorm? A few seconds later, Hepzibah throws her mug at Corsair, telling him that he shouldn't be asking about those kinds of things, and Scott laughs, stating that it looked like it hurt, although he's okay with the saved by a flying mug situation. If you're curious as to who these X-Men are, a long time ago there was a mix-up in the time stream, and the original Young X-Men were brought to the current day. So these are the Young X-Men. Corsair rubs his head stating, yeah, and just then there's a loud explosion and a blinding light. He jumps to his feet, telling everyone that they've got company. Get ready to repel borders. With no direct answer, Corsair calls out to everyone, but when he looks back, he sees them all wrapped up in black tendrils. Scott asks what is going on, and Corsair tells him, "The Brexton Spire, 5th planet, you got, that's where we're..." But before he could finish, something knocks him out, and a raspy voice tells the other raiders, "Make sure we take everything of value, meaty or otherwise." Scott shouts, asking for Corsair to respond, but then a person with a symbiote appears and hisses into the mic before cutting the feed. Within a few moments, Jean runs out calling to Scott, and as Scott tries to explain what happened, she tells him that she knows. The psychic rapport that they share keeps them permanently attached. She was trying to mind her own business, but he was screaming and she saw everything. Scott asks, did she see the face at the end of the transmission? And Jean says that she's pretty sure she won't ever forget. They're going to need the help of a subject matter expert on this one, and it's doubtful that he'll come without a little push. A short while later, over in New York, a group of arms dealers gather to sell some of their new inventory. One of the thugs says that with gear like this, they can take down governments if they want. Gotta spend money to make. But just then, Eddie Brock calls out, stating, "Isn't that sweet? You think that those weapons are going to help you?" He jumps down, punching a couple of the men, and another shouts, "Oh crap, it's Spider-Man!" And Eddie tells him, "You're gonna wish I was Spider-Man. We are Venom!" Eddie turns and charges at a few of the men, firing their guns, and while another gets ready to hit him with flames, he's suddenly hit in the back with a laser. Eddie grabs a man and looks back as Venom tells him, "There are 5 more life forms, but not hostile." Whoever they are, he doesn't remember calling for any backup. Scott tells him, "We're the X-Men, and we'd like to have a word with you." Eddie says, "Oh yeah? Well, I have 2 words, but your innocent ears might not be able to handle them." Scott walks through the knocked out men, stating that they're not here to move in on his score. They need his help. Eddie quickly tells them, "Pass." And Scott tells him, "Wait, just hear us out. There are symbiotes in space." And Eddie says, "Yeah, that's where they live. Pass." As Eddie turns, Venom tells him, "We should hear them out, Eddie." So Scott starts to explain that the symbiotes attacked his father, and Eddie tells him that that's a tough break. Best luck sorting it out. Angel then flies down asking, "Aren't you a little curious about these symbiotes?" And Eddie says, "There are plenty of aliens out there, not all of them nice, so again, no thanks." Venom says, "This is why no one likes you, Eddie." And Jean telepathically tells Scott that he isn't coming along peacefully. Back to Plan A? So Scott fires an optic blast, telling her, yeah, back to Plan A. Angel swoops back to attack, but as he passes by, Eddie rips a car door off and throws it at him, telling him, "That's as nice as I'm going to get. Now you better be gone, you poked the bear." Jean calls out for everyone that she needs to shut down 2 mines, so keep him busy until she can get through to them. Hank jumps into attack, and Eddie grabs him by the leg, slamming him into a pile of garbage. Bobby then tries to cover Eddie in ice, but he breaks through, shouting, "Who the hell do you think you're messing with? We've torn new orifices and better people for less." But before he can finish, he begins to rub his head and then he falls face first to the ground. Scott tells Jean nice work, but Jean responds that she didn't do anything. It was the symbiote. It put him to sleep. Back up in space, Corsair begins to wake up asking what happened, and Hepzibah runs over stating, "Nice of you to join us. Whoever attacked us, they don't seem like they want to kill us. My best guess is whoever it is, they're trying to cash in on our bounties." Corsair says, "Like hell they are. I've still got a few cards up my sleeves," and with that he bites down on his lip. Hepzibah asks what he's doing, but Corsair spits something on the ground stating, "He's done nothing in all of his days if not prepare for desperate measures." In a pool of blood, a small device begins to beep, and then sprout legs climbing onto their restraints. While the microbot begins to deactivate the cuffs, Hepzibah said that she thought she noticed something when they... Either way, she's impressed. The cuffs fall off, and Corsair then asks, "Who's next?" But before anyone can answer, tendrils reach out from behind, and a symbiote-bonded Killer Thrill asks, "What's going on here?" She crushes the microbot and tells Corsair that they only need to keep them barely alive, so he might not want to do that. Meanwhile, back on Earth, Eddie begins to wake up grumbling, "Someone's gotta pay." And Venom tells him, "The X-Men didn't knock you out. It was me, Eddie." Eddie begins beating on the test tube, shouting, "Let me out!" And Hank tells him, "I'm afraid I can't do that. Even though we did some examinations on you, there's still a few questions we'd like to ask." Eddie begins to yell, "You examine me? When I get out of here, I'm going to eat that big brain of yours first." Scott then says, "Look, I watched my father be attacked by people wearing symbiotes and they looked just like you." Eddie tells him, "I'm not sure what you mean. Maybe you did see someone wearing a symbiote, but they are like me. The symbiote isn't the problem, it's the one wearing it." Venom then whispers to Eddie, "Please help them, for me, for those like me." Scott begins to lower the force field around the test tube, and Eddie asks, "Where are we?" And Scott says, "Our ship, and we're a long way from home." As it begins to lower itself down into a spaceport, Eddie steps out stating, "You kidnapped me!" And Scott tells him, "Yeah, sorry about that." And Jean says, "Look at it this way. How often do you get to see strange and faraway worlds?" Under his breath, Eddie says, "Too damn many if you ask me." Jean then says that she's going to set up a short-range psi sweep that should allow them to communicate with anyone that they meet, but they need to stay within a few yards of her. Danger, the X-Men ship AI, tells Hank that they will not be able to accompany him. There are repairs that need to be done to the ship. Hank says not to worry, they've done enough getting them this far. As the group moves out, Hank uses his future tech to scan on the terminals for ship logs and turns back to state that he found the Starjammer. It's not far from here. A short distance away in another port, Scott says that's it. The Starjammer. They need to get on and see what happened. As everyone gets on, an alien off in the distance begins to watch, and they all get on board the ship, looking through the wreckage when suddenly a voice shouts out, "The Starjammers are alive!" The small robot, Sikorsky, pushes over a vent cover and crawls out, and Scott grabs him asking what happened. Sikorsky tells him that they were attacked. They were brutal, more terrible than anything that they've encountered. They were wearing Clintar symbiotes, using them as armor and biological weapons. Venom asks Eddie, "Are you listening? We've seen symbiotes used as weapons recently." And Eddie asks, "How can we forget?" Sikorsky then says to just leave him there. The damages that he suffered look worse than they are. They need to go out and find what happened to everyone else. As everyone walks back up the ship, Eddie says, "Great, we're gonna get ourselves killed out there." And Venom tells him, "We don't have a choice." Eddie sighs, telling him, "We're gonna have to watch over these damn kids, aren't we?" A short while later, the group heads over to the tavern to try and get some answers, but the bartender tells them that whatever they're asking, he doesn't have answers. Anything that he says is gonna mean trouble for him. They came here for a Clintar war brute. Way he sees it, he's either looking for Hayes Mancer or thereafter. But before he can finish, a voice calls out to Scott and the others, asking, "Hey, you looking for us?" Killer Thrill symbiote bonded men walk in, and Bobby says, "This is why we don't let kids into bars, you know. Always end up in brawls with alien nightmares." Eddie sighs, "Yeah, here we go." Jean telepathically tells Scott to play it cool, but Scott says that that's them. Those are the guys that ambushed the Starjammers. Within seconds, a bar fight erupts, and just as the X-Men begin to gain the upper hand, Scott is stabbed by tendrils in the back with Jean shouting for Scott. The one who attacked Scott then grabs Jean, telling her not to worry about her boyfriend. "You should be worrying about you." Eddie punches one of the attackers, telling everyone, "Get Scott and get out of here. I'll hold them back." Scott fires a blast, yelling, "No, they know where my father is." But Angel flies by, grabbing him, telling him, "No, we need to get out of here." As everyone gets outside, Eddie follows, webbing up the door, stating that should hold him for a bit. As he turns, he sees the alien from before that was watching them, and he chases after him, stating, "You're the one who told those people where we were, weren't you?" The alien starts to run, yelling, "I didn't know anything!" And Eddie opens up his mouth, stating, "You'd better hope that's not the case, and you better start giving us answers fast." A short while later, in a back alley merchant tent, Angel looks out stating that he's pretty sure they weren't followed. But Eddie appears in the shadows telling him, "Think again." Hank asks how did they find them, and Eddie says, "It wasn't hard. There's 5 Earthlings in a city full of Martians or whatever. That means if he can find us, they can find us. We're gonna need to hit them hard and fast. Good news, I got information already. I didn't find where the space pirates are being held, but they know where we can start looking." Bobby asks, how did he manage that? He's a stranger in this land just like them. And Eddie says, "Well, we can be persuasive when we need to be." Scott leans up stating, "All right, let's go." And Jean tells him, "Wait, you're not in any shape to fight." Scott says, "I'm going. They have my dad, and I'm gonna see this through." Eddie opens up a tent stating, "The kid's got moxie. It's gonna get him killed. We like that." Meanwhile, elsewhere on the planet, Corsair screams in pain as Killer Thrill says, "Aw, that's it, cutie pie. Give Killer Thrill your very best shrieks and squeals." While Killer Thrill plays with Corsair and Hepzibah, one of her men comes in stating the offers are in. The Brood have made the highest bid, and it sounds like they really want them bad. Killer Thrill puts their tendrils out of Corsair's nose, stating, "Guess playtime's over. I'm gonna cherish our time together." As Killer Thrill leaves, she tells her men to send out a signal to the rest of the team. They leave in 3 hours with or without them. But back over in the warehouse district, Eddie tells everyone that this is it. "There's a guy named Haz Manser. He can tell us about the space pirates. He's an arms dealer." Angel looks at Scott and says maybe he should sit this one out. Scott tells him that's not gonna happen. Besides, I can't be too far from Jean and her TK bandages. Eddie turns back and says, "This guy is anything like the dealers on Earth. He's gonna be a one-guy SOB. We won't kill him, but we'll keep him alive long enough to get answers." Inside the warehouse, the hunter from before, Hayes, tells the group of androids that these are the finest symbiotes money can buy. Warbrutes, slinkers, slashers, anything you need. One of the androids looks at the containment tank asking, "How are they so docile?" And Hayes says, "Believe me, they're not docile. I'm using a special chemical concoction to elevate their aggression. Same stuff that keeps the symbiote from running off during the bonding process too." The android turns back and asks if they're so powerful, why isn't he wearing one? And Hayes says that he doesn't like to get high off his own supply. He never needed to. Just then, Eddie appears from the rafters asking, "Mind if we cut in for a little user review?" He then jumps down, slamming down the head of one of the larger androids. Another android shouts, "One escaped!" And Hayes tells him, "Nah, not this one. This hasn't been with me for a long time." Wondering where it went. Eddie looks at him and asks, "What did you say?" But before he can get an answer, Jean and the others burst in through the wall and Hank yells that they need to save the symbiotes. Everyone engages the androids and one of them pulls out a gun getting ready to fight. Hayes jumps on him shouting to just let the drones handle this if they damage, but the android's stray shot hits Angel, knocking him into the containment tanks, breaking it. The symbiote inside oozes out and then reaches for Angel, and Hayes begins shooting sonic blasts stating, "Sorry, we're gonna have to catch up another time." More of the symbiotes crawl out grabbing whatever they can, and in this case, it's Scott and the X-Men. As the symbiote covers Scott, he quickly covers his eyes, shouting, "No, no, wait! I can see." Using their new symbiotic enhanced abilities, Scott and the others begin to take down the androids, leaving Eddie with Hayes. Hayes charges his sonic blaster, stating, "Looky here, the symbiote that got away. I was wondering when we'd cross paths again." One of the androids shoots Angel down with a blast of fire, and Jean goes to check on him, and he says, "You know, it's been a while since I've been afraid of fire." Another android grabs a hold of Hank, and as he does, Scott yells, "Hang on!" and he holds out his arm. A second later, an optic blast shoots out of his eyes and hand, ripping apart the android's arm. As Bobby destroys another android, Hayes hits Eddie again, separating Venom from him, telling him, "Once I peel the symbiote from those kids, they're gonna fetch a premium." Jean and the others begin to focus their attacks on Hayes, and as Hayes dodges Angel, he tells him, "I got enough anti-symbiote tech to sear those things off alive." But as Hayes gets ready to hit the X-Men, Eddie uncloaks behind Hayes, telling him, "You know those toys are fun to use, but don't forget about me." Eddie punches Hayes, and soon the X-Men begin to gain full control of the symbiotes, dismantling the last remaining androids. Eddie pins Hayes to the ground, telling him, "You got your licks in, but now it's my turn." Before he could bite down, though, Jean stops him, telling him, "We can't kill him." Eddie asks, "You know what this guy does, right? You think he deserves to live?" Jean pulls back the symbiote, telling him, "Yes, but the X-Men don't kill." Eddie picks Hayes up by the throat, telling him, "You heard the kids? Now give me the answers that we're looking for." Hayes struggles for air, asking, "Haven't you heard of client confidentiality?" Jean begins to probe his mind, stating, "Thankfully, we don't need you to cooperate. But I will need something to latch onto to get in there. Something like fear would do." Eddie squeezes down on Hayes' neck, and as he screams in pain, Jean tells him, "That'll do." A few moments later, she tells everyone that she's got it. Hayes modified the symbiotes to tracking devices. That's how he's going to find them. Hank runs over to the terminal and begins to sift through the records until he finds a group of symbiotes that were recently sold. He tells everyone that they were sold to a group of interstellar bounty hunters, but he should warn them they are currently preparing to leave the planet. As everyone gets aboard the X-Jet, Eddie says that they really should have let him kill Hayes. Jean tells him she knows how he feels, but it wasn't his call. They're not killers. They ruined him and handed him over to the authorities. Isn't that enough? Eddie says, it must be nice having those moral standards, especially when you go around, I don't know, kidnapping people. Scott says that it doesn't matter what Jean did. All that matters now is finding Corsair. Eddie looks over and says, you're being too emotional now. We really should remove your symbiotes before they fully bond. Keeping them now, it's too dangerous. Scott asks, dangerous for who? Eddie gets up asking, are you trying to puff up on me? If I need to teach you a little humility, I'd be happy to do so. Scott gets up from his chair and Jean separates them, telling them to just cut it out already. Eddie is right, the symbiotes are affecting them. But right now, the symbiotes don't want to leave them. They want to see this through and rescue the others that Hayes has sold. While everyone travels to find Killer Thrill back over in the Nova prison, Hayes sits in his cell sulking. However, before he can wallow in self-pity, the Novas outside begin charging toward the entrance, shouting, there's a breach! As Hayes looks out of his cell, all of the Nova units guarding the cell are slaughtered, and a voice asks, are you Hayes Mancer? Are you like me, a hunter? Hayes tells the men standing before him, if you couldn't tell, I'm kind of out of business right now. The poison-infected Craven says, I think not. You can help me on one last hunt. A short while later, in deep space, Killer Thrill and her men travel to the Brood location, and just as they begin to slow down, there's a loud wha-boom of something hitting their ship. Killer Thrill quickly puts her symbiote suit back on, grabbing the controls and shouts, what just happened? A worker from down below picks up the intercom stating that they were hit with, ice. Another then says that it looks like this chunk broke off a planetary rig. If they were in a smaller ship, they'd be dead. The worker beside him tells him to take a closer look. It says that it looks like there's something moving inside, and just then an optic blast shoots out, hitting him. A hole in the ice begins to melt away, and Jean says, knock, knock, and mentally possesses the men. Over the intercom, Killer Thrill shouts, asking what happened, and then using one of the men, Jean tells her, everything is fine. We hit some ice, but the damage is minimal. Eddie begins to tie everyone up, and Scott looks at one of them and says, we'll let this one talk. Scott holds out his hand, creating 5 optic shards from his fingers, asking, where are the Starjammers? Jean tells him to relax, there's an easier way to ask, and she telepathically connects to the man, stating that the Starjammers are okay. They're being kept alive because the pirates want to collect the bounty. She also knows exactly where they're being held, and now so does he. Scott says, okay, we're splitting up into 2 groups. One goes to the Starjammers, and the others are going to hit the pirates. Angel grabs all of the men, throwing them into the ice chunk, and Bobby covers it back up, stating, well, this should work as long as they don't dislodge. You all should be proud, though. I haven't made one joke about putting these guys on ice. Once everyone is ready, Jean begins to break the teams up, and Scott says that he's going to go rescue Corsair alone. Jean pauses for a moment and says that she knows that he isn't coming with them, but just be careful. As Scott leaves, Jean looks back, stating that she has a feeling that she may never see Scott again, and she didn't actually say goodbye. Just outside of the control room, Eddie tells everyone that these guys are going to be tough. Hesitate and it's your own fault. Seconds later, he charges in and the rest of the X-Men follow. Meanwhile, back with Scott, he sneaks in through the ship until he finds the room that Corsair and the others are being held in. While some of the guards talk amongst themselves, Scott jumps in, letting the symbiote suit take over, and he quickly knocks them all out. He places his hand on the door, getting ready to blast through, but before he does, the door slides open. Everyone begins to ask who's there, and Corsair tells them not to worry. It's not torture, Starjammers, it's a rescue. Scott pulls back the suits, telling him, it's all right, it's me. Corsair runs up hugging him, telling him, oh, you're a sight for sore eyes. Scott tells him, you are too. Except I have to keep my eyes squeezed shut. Back over at the control room, the fight between the X-Men and Killer Thrill rages on, but just before Angel's about to get struck down, Jean releases a mental shriek. Everyone begins to cover their ears, and Eddie asks, what's going on? I'm not hearing anything. Hank tells him Jean is tricking their minds into thinking they're hearing the shrieks. Good job, Jeannie. But just then a shadow casts over everyone, and Eddie looks out the window to see a large ship coming towards them, telling everyone, we got some company. With Jean's attention elsewhere, Killer Thrill runs through, pushing Jean, stating, maybe the buyers are early. Hank asks Jean if everything's alright, and she tells him to just try and communicate with that ship. She's gonna take care of the arid space pirates. Before she can leave, though, Eddie tells her, be careful. Killer Thrill is treacherous enough. We don't know what we're facing with this other ship. Jean tells him to do her a favor, look after Scott and the others. She begins to chase after Killer Thrill, and she looks through Scott's mind, and she says that she doesn't want to interrupt him. He needs this moment. She turns a corner into the storage room, and Killer Thrill says, "Finally, some alone time! That little sound effect won't work again. I've beefed up my psychic defenses for this one." But before they could fight, a voice says, "That is unfortunate. I hate seeing symbiotes at each other's throats in such a way." Kraven steps out of the shadows, continuing, stating, "I can offer you a more unified way, a peaceful chance to join me. However, I'm not patient when others resist my generosity. And what you will not willingly give, we will take by force." Many poisons begin to surround the two of them, and a few seconds later, Scott begins to scream in pain. If you're wondering what the poisons are, they are one of the few creatures in the multiverse that can stop the Venoms. We have an entire video on that, and I'll link it down below. Corsair asks what's wrong, and Scott tells him it's Jean. She's screaming, but she's gone. I can't feel her presence anymore. Back at the control room, Eddie looks around asking, "Does anyone else not feel Jean's psychic link anymore?" Hank says that it might have something to do with the other ship. They're not communicating. They may not be buyers. Eddie then asks who else could it be? Space is a pretty big place for a big random ship to show up. A voice then stops him, telling him, "Not random at all, Venom. We're all tracking them. We want the symbiotes, and you too." Eddie snaps back and says, "Wait, those two are poisons!" The transformed Jean tells him, "We really dislike that name. You will come to dislike it too. You will call me Red, Marvel Girl, or just Jean Grey. This time, there's no escape for you. This time, you will join us, and so will the rest of your miserable lineage." Angel asks, "Is that Jean?" And Eddie tells him, "No, it's not Jean anymore. She's a poison now." Hank then asks, "What is that supposed to mean? What's a poison?" And Eddie says, "It means that we should have gotten rid of those symbiotes when I told you to." Jean tells the smaller poisons to get them, and Eddie tackles Hank down, telling him, "Whatever you do, do not let those things touch you. One touch from them and they will absorb the symbiote, eat it, and then eat the host." Killer Thrill and Kraven begin breaking through Bobby's ice, stating, "We're gonna get them." But Angel flaps his wings, knocking the two of them away. Eddie shouts to retract those wings. "You're gonna become an easy target for them to get at." And Jean then grabs everyone in a TK field, stating, "Once we take your symbiotes, once the manifestation is complete, you'll be purged of weakness. You'll be made perfect. Freedom is an awful lie, and you will see that once you join the Hive." As Bobby floats there, he says, "This is bad, right? Like, as bad as it's going to get?" Just then, the smaller poisons are hit with optic blasts, and Corsair yells for everyone to get out of there. As Jean holds her own, Scott asks what had they done to her, and Jean tells him, "They made me better." Kraven slashes at Eddie, stating, "You're one of the survivors, one of the Venom hosts." Scott then shouts, asking, "Why can't we hear each other's thoughts?" And Jean tells him, "Once you join us, your minds will all be connected again. We'll all become one." Killer Thrill's crew becomes infected with the poisons, and she tells them, "Welcome back to the winning team! Now go do Mama's dirty work." Corsair begins to shoot the smaller poisons, telling everyone that they need to hit the bricks now. Scott begins to run back to help Corsair, but Eddie webs him up from behind and flings them back, stating, "Come on, we need to go." With everyone piling through the door, Hank uses his tech to close the door behind them, and Scott looks back, asking, "What about Jean?" Eddie tells him, "I'm sorry to say, but there is no more Jean. When those creatures take a symbiote, they use up whoever's wearing it as a catalyst for the process. They take their bodies and their mind. Jean is dead." Hank tells everyone that he called the check over. "But they're gonna need a pathway, right, Bobby?" Bobby says that he's on it, creating an ice tunnel from Killer Thrill's ship to their own, and then says, "All right, kids, you must be this tall to ride." The doors behind everyone open, and Jean laughs, telling them all, "Ha ha, that's cute. You just lost one of your teammates, but you haven't lost your sense of humor." Bobby stumbles over his words, stating, I didn't mean anything. You're still an X-Men. You'll get past this." Eddie tells him, "No." Scott says, "She won't. She's already gone." Jean says, "That's good. It'll be so much easier once you accept the truth." And so the fight for everyone's lives begins with two powerful forces clashing together in an all-out brawl. Eddie pulls himself above the crowd, stating, "The poisons are trying to stop us from getting to the tunnel, but the symbiotes can adapt to space. Scott, make a hole!" Scott charges up a blast, stating that he can do it, and he fires, destroying the ice tunnel. As the vacuum of space begins to pull everyone out, Bobby shouts that this is a bad idea. With everyone being thrown out into space, everyone floats around, and one of the poisons makes its way towards Angel. He sees it latching onto him, and as he screams, he makes a decision of sacrifice, burning the poison along with the symbiote. While everyone struggles to keep the poisons away, Corsair grabs the controls of the X-Jet and begins to fly towards them. Eddie webs up Scott and Bobby as Angel flies by, grabbing both him and Hank, leaving Jean to float by herself. At the spaceport, Corsair asks Scott if it's going to be okay. With everything that just happened, he would hate to see him leave. Scott tells him that he's not sure if there's any other choice. They need to get back home. They may have given up their symbiotes, but they're still in the fight. The Starjammers all begin to wave goodbye, and Corsair says that he's so sorry. If he hadn't come to rescue them, Jean still would be. But Scott stops him, telling him, "Don't. Jean wouldn't have had it any other way. Once everyone boards the X-Jet, Eddie says that he hates to be rushing the mourning process, but the poisons aren't done with us. If we don't get back home, we could be dealing with the end of the world. Venom whispers to Eddie that for Scott, his world has already ended. As Hank fires up the thruster, Scott sits back down, and then a faded image of Jean begins to call out to him. He looks up asking, "What?" And Eddie says, "Is everything okay?" Scott looks away stating, "I'll be fine, just seeing ghosts." A short while later, on Clintar, Corsair and the Starjammers touch down to release the symbiotes that bonded with Scott and the others. But as they step out onto the desert, they begin to notice something. All of the symbiotes are gone. And there you have it. Poison X has concluded, and Venom is still tying up loose ends in its storyline. So if you're wondering what's going on, it's quite obvious that over at Marvel, they decided that they wanted one writer on Venom, and he started up a whole bunch of plot lines because that's what they were going to do with Venom. But then the movie was coming out, so they decided to switch over the writers. So they had like this weird leeway where they were wrapping up loose ends in the Venom plot to allow the current Venom plot to start kind of uninhibited. It didn't want to get held up. Okay, I had a Porky Pig moment right there, but you totally get that. Today's episode was brought to you by Squarespace, squarespace.com/Comicstorian, and now I want to tell you a little bit more about that. Like a shrewd and like, oh yeah, I want to tell you about Squarespace. It's a great way to get your websites going. We use it, so you should too. Squarespace is offering my viewers 10% off their first purchase with them. Just go to squarespace.com/Comicstorian or click the link in the description to sign up and start building your online presence. That's squarespace.com/Comicstorian. That's squarespace.com/Comicstorian. Why Squarespace? Well, Squarespace is easily one of the most easy to use and beautiful website development tools out there. Some of the world's biggest companies and Hollywood stars and even your favorite YouTubers use Squarespace to create a high design site that is super simple to maintain.